I was 19 years old when the Pacific taught me one truth the hard way. Nighttime belonged to the Japanese. At least, that's what every man on Bougainville believed during those early months. Daylight brought its own dangers, snipers in the treeline, the occasional mortar round, the constant hum of sweating and waiting. But when the sun dipped behind the black ridge, the jungle transformed into something else entirely. Something alive, something watching. We never said it out loud, but every man felt it. The Japanese owned the dark. Their patrols moved like ghosts, slipping between roots and shadows without snapping a twig. Their infiltrators crawled on their bellies for hours without making a single mistake, and their night assaults silent until the last second were the kind of thing that made you sleep with one boot on and your rifle propped against your chest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Back then, our perimeter on Bougainville was little more than a messy ring of foxholes carved into mud so thick it sucked at your ankles like wet cement. The towering palms and ferns blocked out most moonlight, leaving the ground in near blackness even on clear nights. We strung barbed wire where we could, hammered in some trip flares, set a few tin can rattles. But compared to the Japanese night fighters, our defences felt like toys. And into all of that mess, the Marine Corps somehow decided that I, a skinny kid from Kansas, should be the one handling the battalion's radio gear. A radioman's job wasn't glamorous. You hauled around a metal box the size of a small suitcase, prayed it didn't get wet, and spent most of your time worrying about whether some sniper would put a bullet through your antenna. But I loved the work. Radios made sense to me. Static had a pattern. Code felt like a puzzle. And, out there, in a place where nothing made sense, that gave me something solid to hold on to. But when the Japanese started testing our lines every night, probing, crawling, creeping so close you could hear their laboured breathing, my job became something else entirely, because the brass wanted updates, constant updates. And that meant I was awake during every dark hour, headset on, whispering into a handset I prayed the enemy couldn't triangulate. Most nights, it was little more than routine reports. Sometimes, it was frantic. Whispered requests for illumination rounds or for stretcher teams. And on a few nights I heard things I still wish I could forget. But the night that changed everything, the night of my so-called accidental trick, began like any other. Hot. Wet. Our section was holding a position near a shallow depression that filled with foul-smelling water every afternoon. We joked it was our private swimming pool. No one dared touch it. The Japanese had been quiet that evening, too quiet. Even the insects seemed to sense something was off. Around midnight, a fog rolled in thick, low, almost oily. You could barely see 5 feet in front of your foxhole. The air felt choked, pressurized, like the world was bracing for something. I was sitting cross-legged beside Corporal Dean, my rifle within arm's reach, the radio strapped against the wall of our foxhole. Dean was cleaning his bayonet in silence. I don't know why no one could see it, but Dean was a man who liked order in a place that had none. "Think they're coming tonight?" I whispered. He shrugged. "Fog's good for them, bad for us." That was all he said. Dean wasn't much of a talker. Sometime around 0100, I received a message from Battalion HQ. Increased movement detected on sectors B and D, possibly a probing attack. Stay alert. No flares unless contact confirmed. That was the rule. If you wasted a flare at the wrong time, you blinded your own men and gave the enemy shadows to dive into. By 0130, everything went dead still. No wind, no rustle, no croaking frogs, nothing. That was when we knew. I tightened my headset, leaned closer to the radio, ready for whatever came next. The static hissed softly against my ear, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Then we heard it. Not gunfire, not footsteps. A faint metallic tap from somewhere in front of our line, followed by another, and another. Measured, intentional. The Japanese sometimes used small stones or spent casings to mark positions as they crawled quiet signals for their assault teams. We'd learned that the hard way. Dean froze, fingers wrapped around his rifle grip. No one breathed. Then came the sound we feared most. A soft, slithering slide, cloth and skin moving across wet leaves, dozens of them, maybe more. In the fog, they were invisible. HQ crackled in my ear. Report. Any visual? One could see a damn thing. Then the faint whisper of Japanese voices drifted through the mist, low, rhythmic, coordinated. They were setting up. We were seconds from a full assault. And that was when the universe decided to play the strangest, luckiest hand of my entire life. A sudden burst of static exploded in my headset so loud I jerked back. It wasn't normal interference. It was sharp, erratic. And then a shrill mechanical screech unlike anything I'd ever heard come through a military channel. It echoed across our line. It echoed into the jungle. It echoed into the fog. And everything went silent. The Japanese crawling toward us stopped instantly. I didn't need to see them. I felt it. Dean's eyes went wide. What the hell was that? I had no idea. Radios didn't make sounds like that on their own. Not unless something was badly wrong. I checked the dials, the frequency, the power, everything seemed normal. But the screech kept stuttering in short, glitchy bursts. Then something unbelievable happened. The whispers in the jungle drifted back, pulling away from us, retreating. The Japanese were falling back. No gunfire, no charge, no attack. They melted into the darkness like the fog itself had swallowed them. HQ came through again. All units stand by. Enemy movement decreasing across all sectors. It didn't feel real. For 30 full minutes, we waited for the assault that never came. Men kept asking me to replay whatever the hell the sound had been, as if I had any control over it. Eventually, I managed to stabilize the radio by switching through a few backup crystals. The screech faded. The line returned to its usual quiet static. But the Japanese never returned that night. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The next morning, the officers were buzzing. Something strange had happened across the perimeter. Every company had reported the same thing. Japanese units preparing for an attack, a sudden loud radio screech, enemy withdrawal. Some Marines swore they'd heard shouting in Japanese right afterward, fearful, alarmed, panicked. We didn't know their language, but fear sounded the same in any tongue. Later that afternoon, after the fog lifted, scouts found abandoned Japanese gear just beyond our wire. Packs, ammo, even an officer's field map case, all dropped in a hurry. But the strangest thing was this. Not a single Japanese body, not a single shot fired, not a single follow-up probe that night, or the next. It was as if they believed something was waiting for them out there in the dark, something worse than us. Of course, the officers wanted answers. Battalion HQ summoned me. What did you transmit? Was it a coded warning? Some new jamming signal? Did you sabotage the frequency? I told them the truth. I had no idea what caused the noise. They didn't like that answer. But a few days later, after interviewing every man who'd been on watch, the brass realized something unsettling. Different platoons, different radios, different frequencies. And the strange screech had hit all of them at the exact same moment, like some kind of electrical surge had traveled through the earth itself, or like the jungle had screamed. No one wanted to write that in an official report. But here's the part that kept me awake long after the war was over. Weeks later, when we intercepted fragments of Japanese communications, the translators picked out one repeated phrase, a phrase the enemy used to warn units away from certain zones. Ghost voice. They believed the jungle had spoken that night. A bad omen, a spirit, a warning, and without knowing it, Without meaning to, without even understanding what had happened, I had given them that ghost. I didn't know yet that the screech would become the key to breaking their night assault pattern entirely, or that the officers would ask me to recreate the sound on purpose, or that doing so would make the Japanese believe something supernatural haunted our perimeter. No, that revelation would come later. For now, all I understood was this. One accidental radio glitch had stopped the deadliest night fighters in the Pacific, and I had no idea why. But I was about to find out. The officers didn't let me sleep after that night. I'd barely dozed off in my foxhole, head resting against my radio pack like a brick pillow, when a runner shook me awake and told me, "Battalion wanted me, immediately." That word immediately always meant one of two things. Either something had gone horribly wrong, or someone up the chain believed they'd discovered something important. I wasn't sure which one this was. They brought me to a crude command tent lit by 2 flickering lanterns. The air inside smelled like sweat, mildew, and soggy paper. A few officers huddled over a map table, their faces carved by worry and exhaustion. Captain Ward, our battalion communications officer, motioned me over. He didn't waste time. "Explain this," he said, tapping his pen against a sheet covered in scribbled timestamps. Every outpost along the eastern perimeter heard the same signal at the same time, but none of them were on your frequency. I shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I told you. I don't know what caused it. The moment before it happened, everything was normal." "Normal?" Ward's eyebrows twitched. "Normal doesn't echo across half a mile of jungle." Another officer, a lieutenant from S2 Intelligence, leaned in. "Do you think it was deliberate? A coded Japanese signal that bled onto our net?" "No," I said immediately. I didn't know much, but I knew radio behavior. Japanese sets didn't have the juice for something like that, and no friendly set could have done it either, not without someone intentionally overloading the transmitter. Ward paced back and forth like a caged animal. "Well, intentional or not, it saved our hides," he muttered. The Japanese pulled back at the exact moment that noise hit. It wasn't coincidence. The S2 lieutenant crossed his arms. "We've been dealing with their night infiltration tactics for months. They're disciplined, methodical. They don't break off an attack because of a noise." He paused. "Unless they believe the noise means something." That comment hung in the air. A superstition? A misinterpretation? A psychological trigger? Whatever it was, the officers wanted to use it. Ward stopped pacing and turned to me again. "Listen carefully. I need you to recreate that sound." I blinked. "Recreate it, sir." "I didn't create it. The first time." "Try," he said. "Your team will help. Make the radio do what it did that night." I didn't argue it wasn't my place, but inside, I was uneasy. Radio signals were predictable, mechanical. They didn't just screech. But I nodded. "Yes, sir." That was how I found myself sitting at a makeshift communications table for the next 12 hours, surrounded by spare tubes, crystals, antenna wire, and half-broken headsets, while a squad of Marines guarded the tent like I was working on the Manhattan Project. I tested every component, tuned every frequency, boosted the transmitter, swapped tubes until my fingers were black with grease. But nothing worked. Nothing resembled that eerie, unnatural sound. It wasn't a feedback loop. It wasn't cross-channel interference. It wasn't a power spike. At least, not one I could replicate. By sunset, Captain Ward was frustrated, and the lieutenant looked like he wanted to shove me into the nearest foxhole and bury me with it. "Try again," Ward insisted. "We need that noise." "Sir," I said slowly, "even if I could recreate it, we don't know why it stopped them. It could have been anything." "Not anything," the S2 officer corrected. "We intercepted fragments of Japanese chatter last month. They've been talking about what they call night spirits' omens in the jungle. My gut says your sound triggered one of those fears." I didn't like that explanation. Superstition was unpredictable, unreliable, dangerous to depend on. But the officers didn't care about the science or lack of it. They cared about one fact. The Japanese stopped because of something I did, and they wanted it again. That night, the Japanese returned. Not in full force, no massed assault, no battle cries, but in small, probing groups. Men crawling on their stomachs, whispering in the dark, testing our lines. Our listening posts reported movement around 2,000. 300. Scouts spotted shadows shifting near the tree line. One Marine swore he heard a metal clink right by the wire. The officers panicked. Ward grabbed me by the shoulder and practically shoved me into the radio tent. "Do it," he hissed. "Make the sound. Make anything like it." But I couldn't. No amount of flipping circuits or overloading transmitters produced anything close to the original screech. The Japanese kept creeping closer. Our machine gunners tightened their grips. Men raised rifles in shaking hands. Flares sat ready in launchers, forbidden unless absolutely necessary. HQ whispered updates into my headset. "Movement north of your position. Multiple contacts. Looks like they're forming up." Then, from somewhere deep in the fog, a muffled Japanese whistle, the signal to advance. Our entire line braced. And still I had nothing. But the universe wasn't done playing games with me. At 0116, just as the first Japanese scouts brushed the outer wire, something strange happened again. The radio hummed, buzzed, crackled with a weird electrical tremor. I leaned forward, eyes wide. KKSHA, KKTTEERRK. The same horrific metallic shriek ripped through the headset, and for the second time out through the connected loudspeaker. It clawed through the night like a banshee. Men flinched. Some shouted. Dean dropped his rifle. But the Japanese reacted like they'd been struck by lightning. Shouts erupted from the tree line, panicked, frantic. Several shadows bolted upright from the ground. Others scrambled backwards on hands and knees, abandoning their positions. One squad fired wildly, not at us, but into the trees behind them, as if trying to kill something approaching from the darkness. Their retreat was instant, chaotic, uncontrolled. The assault collapsed before it even began. Marines looked at me like I'd personally summoned a demon. Captain Ward sprinted into the tent, grabbed my shoulders, and shook me. "How did you do that?" "I didn't," I insisted. "The radio, sir. It does it on its own." Ward didn't believe me, but the S2 officer did. He stared at me with a grim, calculating expression. "They think it's a spirit," he said softly. "They think something in the jungle is warning them away." He tapped the side of the radio with his knuckle, and they think it speaks through this. The next morning, patrols moved cautiously into the area where the Japanese had gathered. What they found unsettled everyone. Dozens of abandoned helmets, rifles left leaning against trees, a torn flag, ammo packs thrown aside in panic. Japanese soldiers didn't abandon gear, not unless something terrified them. The patrol leader brought back more than just equipment. He brought back a rumor. He said the Japanese had carved a single symbol into several nearby tree trunks, a symbol their officers, sometimes used on maps to mark cursed ground. The S2 officer confirmed it. They'd marked the area as haunted. By noon, word had spread around our battalion. Men clapped me on the back, calling me Ghost Talker, Radio Phantom, and Spirit Sergeant. Even though I wasn't a sergeant, Dean shook his head and muttered, "If you start floating, I'm transferring units." But I wasn't laughing, because I wasn't in control of the thing they believed I controlled. And that terrified me. 2 days later, intelligence intercepted another Japanese report. 3 words stood out. Voice of death. That phrase sent a chill through every man in the intelligence tent. Ward brought me in to hear it myself. I listened through the headset as a translator repeated the intercepted phrase, steady and matter of fact. The enemy describes an unnatural sound. They say it comes before the forest spirits rise. Another line, shakier. They believe the sound warns them, not to approach. Or it curses them. Ward turned to me. "Whatever this is, son, you just broke the most effective part of the Japanese night strategy. Without their infiltration teams, their assaults will be disorganized, sloppy, predictable. I rubbed my temples. So, what now? Now, he said, you're going to help us weaponize it. For the next week, they moved me to a protected position near HQ. An entire squad guarded the tent. I wasn't allowed to go on patrol. They acted like I was carrying some kind of holy relic. Ward and the intelligence staff had a new theory. The Japanese weren't afraid of the sound itself. They were afraid of what they thought it represented. They believed something in the jungle didn't want them there, something powerful, something angry, and the officers wanted me to exploit that fear. They wanted me to broadcast the ghost voice, on purpose. There was just one problem. The sound didn't happen on command. It came randomly, unpredictably, like the radio was channeling some electrical phenomenon, or something else entirely. Whatever caused it, it clearly wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't under my control. But the officers didn't want explanations. Day after day, they had me switch circuits, overload capacitors, rewire antennas, create feedback loops, even jam my own transmitter. Nothing worked. The sound only occurred at night, only during fog, and only when the Japanese were near. And every time it happened, the Japanese fell back in panic. Marines across the front began to trust the ghost voice, more than barbed wire or flares. But I didn't trust it, because deep down, I felt something I couldn't explain. The sound wasn't coming from my radio. It was coming through it, and whatever caused it had not yet revealed its purpose. The strange thing about fear is that it spreads faster than bullets. Within a week, every Marine on Bougainville had heard some version of the story, that the Japanese night fighters, their most disciplined, most feared units, were terrified of a noise that came from my radio. Some said it was a spirit, some said it was a curse, some joked it was my voice being broadcast in hell's own frequency. But underneath the jokes, the unease was real, because no one could explain it. Not the communications men, not the electricians, not the officers, not even the engineers flown in from the rear to inspect my equipment. Every one of them left shaking their heads. It shouldn't be possible, one of them muttered. That sound can't come from these circuits. They replaced nearly every component in my radio: tubes, crystals, battery packs, shielding, the entire motherboard. The sound still came randomly, unpredictably, and always at night, always when the Japanese were near. It felt less like I was operating a piece of equipment and more like I was holding a doorway to something else. I kept those thoughts to myself. Of course, if I'd said any of that out loud, they would have pulled me from duty or sent me to the medical tent for exhaustion. But the truth weighed on me. Heavy. Constant. Especially after the incident on the fourth night. That was the night I realized the sound didn't just scare the Japanese. It hurt them. It started like every other tense evening on Bougainville. Fog creeping low across the jungle floor. Leaves dripping with the day's humidity. Our men swatting at mosquitoes the size of small birds. Around 2,300, scouts reported movement near the riverbed. A larger group this time, maybe a full platoon. Our intelligence officer believed the Japanese were trying to overcome whatever fear the ghost voice had created. Maybe a new officer had arrived. Maybe they'd convinced themselves the sounds were tricks. But they were coming. Ward grabbed me by the collar and dragged me to the radio tent again. "Get ready," he said. "If the sound happens, we need to capture it on secondary equipment. I want to analyze the wave structure." I nodded, though I doubted any recorded wave would tell them anything. Every time they listened back to previous attempts, it just sounded like scrambled static, nothing like the real, piercing phenomenon. Still, I strapped the headset on. I tuned the main frequency, checked the power, adjusted the antenna. Then I waited. The jungle outside was silent, except for the faint clip of boots and distant rustle of Marines shifting in their foxholes. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Movement reports came through. Japanese units triangulating our perimeter, getting into position. They were organizing, planning, preparing for something bigger than the previous attempts. At 0043, a runner burst into the tent. They're close, he hissed. Real close. Ward's eyes shot to me, wide with expectation. Now, he said. Now would be a good time. But nothing happened, just soft, static. I swallowed hard. Then, far off, barely audible, came a chilling sound, a low, rhythmic chant. Dozens of Japanese soldiers, speaking softly in unison. A prayer? A battle hymn? Something meant to steel their nerves before the attack. The hair on my arms stood straight up. The chant grew louder, closer, stronger. They were coming. Ward leaned over me, breathing hard. Do something. But I couldn't, because I wasn't in control. But someone or something else was. At exactly 0051, the radio lights flickered. A hum pulsed through the wires. The metal casing vibrated under my hands. Ward stepped back. What the hell? KKTTTSSHHHA. The sound exploded through the tent like a razor made of lightning. The pitch was so high my teeth ached. The lanterns shook violently. My vision blurred. And outside screams. Not ours. Theirs. Japanese voices ripped through the dark, terrified, disoriented. Some shouted orders. Others begged. More just wailed raw, primal cries. Then came the thuds, bodies collapsing, dropping to the earth. Ward ran outside, and I stumbled after him, my ears ringing. What I saw was unlike anything I'd seen in the war so far. The Japanese assault team, maybe 30, maybe 40 men were on the ground, some clutching their heads, some vomiting, a few crawling away in desperate confusion. Our line didn't fire a shot. No one had to. The ghost voice had hit them before they reached our wire. Medics later told us the Japanese suffered temporary disorientation and something else, bleeding from the ears. Something about that frequency had rattled their bodies from the inside. When I heard that, a cold, sickening weight formed in my chest. I wasn't just scaring them anymore, I was hurting them. And I didn't know how to stop it. The officers, however, were thrilled. This is better than artillery. One of them whispered. A force multiplier with no ammunition cost, another said. Ward wasn't smiling, but there was a fire in his eyes, a dangerous one. Son, he told me quietly, you've stumbled into something big here, something that could end this campaign faster than anything MacArthur's throwing at the island. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man carrying a live grenade whose pin had already been pulled. Word of the incident spread quickly among the Japanese, and intelligence picked up increasingly panicked chatter. Do not enter the cursed zone. The dying spirit shrieks. The forest punishes those who approach. The voice of death is American. That last line struck me. They believed I was the ghost. Somehow, some way, the superstition had turned me a 19-year-old radioman into a figure of myth. But that wasn't the part that frightened me. It was this. They were sending word to higher command. An officer, possibly an entire company, was coming to eliminate the spirit. Not the Marines. Me. HQ ordered me moved to a fortified bunker closer to the center of the American perimeter. They said it was for my safety. But I knew the truth. They wanted to protect the radio, and the sound it made. For the first time, I wondered whether this thing I carried was becoming more important than the men fighting at the wire. The S2 intelligence officer confirmed it later that evening. Don't take this personally, he said, but you're an asset now, a strategic one. I didn't like that, not one damn bit, because assets weren't treated like men. They were treated like tools, replaceable tools. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard echoes of the noise, sharp, metallic, unnatural, like something tapping on the inside of my skull. And somewhere deep inside me, a thought crept in that I couldn't push away. What if the sound wasn't meant to help us? What if it wasn't meant for us at all? The next morning, the officers finally approved a new operation, a deliberate attempt to lure Japanese night fighters into range so the ghost voice could break them. Ward presented it like a tactical necessity, but deep down, I felt sick. We were using superstition as a weapon. We were using me as a weapon. And the worst part? It was working. That evening, around 2100, the fog thickened again, thicker than usual, a wet blanket smothering the jungle, the sky, even our own senses. The Japanese were out there. We all felt it. And somewhere inside me, the radio waited. Not for orders. Not for transmissions. For something else. Something I still didn't understand. And that was the night everything changed. Because the Japanese weren't the only ones coming. Something else was. Something I had been hearing not with my ears, but with the radio, ever since the first night. And on that fog-bound evening, it finally answered back. By dawn, the ridge looked nothing like it had the morning before. What had once been a jagged line of foxholes, broken palms, and muddy trenches had turned into a warped, steaming battlefield, littered with craters still warm to the touch and spent brass so thick you could scoop it with a helmet. The night assault was over, but nobody on that ridge felt victorious. The American radio man who had accidentally triggered the Japanese collapse, now half conscious with exhaustion, half frozen by the idea that the miracle might have been dumb luck, lay cradling the shattered handset of his SCR 300 like it was a wounded pet. The crack that had caused the distorted, ghostly American reinforcement signal still glowed faintly from heated metal. To everyone else, he was the hero of the night. To himself, he was just praying he didn't have to use that radio again any time soon. "Get up, kid," Sergeant Willis said, nudging his boot against the radio man's shoulder. "Colonel wants you down the far end of the line." Word spread to division. "They want to know exactly what the hell you did." The radioman blinked through the thin morning fog. "I didn't do anything. It was the radio." "Yeah, well," Willis cut in, grinning tiredly. "Radio or not, the whole Japanese battalion withdrew in under 12 minutes. So unless their commander suddenly decided he wanted breakfast back at headquarters, you did something." The ridge grew louder as the wounded were carried down, stretchers sliding through the mud, corpsmen calling for more plasma, and Marines trying to rebuild what remained of the perimeter. But beneath that noise, there was another sound, something new. Silence. The jungle wasn't humming. No snipers were popping shots at silhouettes. No mortars were probing the tree line. The Japanese had pulled back farther than anyone expected. As they walked, Sergeant Willis leaned closer. "Command thinks they intercepted their comms. They heard something strange about reinforcements, and about American artillery coming from behind them. That true?" The radio man nodded weakly. "Sort of. They were listening to us. They heard us. Just wrong," Willis chuckled. "You know, if you did that on purpose, you'd probably get a medal." "I didn't," the radio man insisted. The radio casing warped from the blast. It made the signal horrible, raspy, like it was. He paused. How could he describe something he barely understood? How could he explain that their voices, his voice, had echoed across the jungle, sounding like an entire battalion of Americans? The sergeant clapped him on the back. "Then you're the luckiest son of a bitch in the Pacific." Or the unluckiest, the radio man thought. They reached the command dugout, a shallow slit in the earth, fortified with broken logs, sandbags so soaked they squished like sponges, and a makeshift roof of corrugated metal stolen from a Japanese supply dump. Inside, Colonel Harrington sat hunched over a map, jaw clenched, eyes shadowed by 48 hours without sleep. The colonel didn't look up. "Radio man," he said, voice flat. "Yes, sir. We've been intercepting Japanese chatter since 0400. Their battalion commander, Major Tatsumi, believed he was surrounded by at least 2 additional American companies. He thought artillery was en route. Heavy artillery." The radio man swallowed. "Sir, that wasn't—" "I know it wasn't real," Harrington interrupted, "but the Japanese believed it. They also said, your transmission sounded like it was coming from everywhere, like the jungle itself was speaking." The colonel finally looked up. His eyes were red, but sharp as ever. "That wasn't just interference," he said. "Something you broadcast, whether you meant to or not, turned their entire night plan upside down." The radioman shifted uncomfortably. Sir, it was an accident. Harrington nodded. Most battlefield breakthroughs are. He stood, stretching his back as if carrying the entire Pacific War there. The Japanese night infiltration strategy is built on certainty. Certainty that we won't see them coming, and certainty that they know what we're doing. Last night, you broke that certainty. They doubted their own intel. That doesn't happen, son. Ever. The radioman didn't answer. Harrington pointed at the mangled radio. We're sending that thing to division signals. They want to study what caused the distortion. If we can recreate it. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The idea was terrifying and brilliant in equal measure. A weaponized lie, a phantom battalion, a ghost army carried by radio waves. Sir, the radioman asked, you really think they'll try to use it again? The colonel gave a tired smile. If it saves American lives, son, they'll use it until the war ends. By noon, a group of signals officers arrived, clean uniforms, polished boots, clipboards that had never felt rain. They surrounded the broken radio like archaeologists uncovering an artifact. One knelt, tapping the warped metal casing with a pencil. Look at this. Heat deformation, probably from a near-miss blast. Another adjusted his glasses. And this crack here, right through the modulation plate. That would alter the frequency output enough to create the echo effect. The radioman asked hesitantly. The officer nodded. Yes, it's rudimentary, but under the right atmospheric conditions. It's possible your transmission refracted off moisture pockets in the jungle canopy, might even have bounced between ridges. The radioman stared. So the jungle literally broadcast my message for me. Not intentionally, the officer said. But in war, weather and terrain become co-conspirators. They wrote furiously. The radioman noticed something. None of the officers asked about the Japanese who had died believing that echo. None asked about the Marines who lived because of it. To them, it was math. To him, it was memory. That evening, the jungle came back to life, but differently. Instead of fear, there was watchfulness. Instead of snipers, there was quiet reconnaissance. The Japanese hadn't disappeared. They were observing, trying to understand how a numerically inferior American platoon had suddenly outsmarted them at night. It wouldn't take them long to realize it had been a mistake. The radioman sat alone at the edge of the ridge, staring down the hill at the same trees the Japanese had crawled through hours earlier. A corpse lay tangled in the roots of a fallen banyan tree. The radioman didn't know if he had killed that man or if the man had retreated and died of his wounds. He only knew one thing. The man had heard his voice, and believed it was the voice of an army. Sergeant Willis approached, carrying 2 dented canteens. You're quiet. Just thinking. You did what you had to. Did I? The radioman asked. Or did something else do it, and I'm just the guy holding the broken radio? Kid, half the men in this war swear the jungle itself is fighting. If it decided to lend you a hand last night, thank it and move on. The radioman laughed tiredly. It wasn't a good laugh, just a necessary one. That night was the first in weeks without a Japanese attempt to probe the perimeter. No flares, no mortar harassment, no distant bugles echoing through the dark. The Marines slept in shifts. The radioman barely slept at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the ghostly transmission replaying inside his skull. That warped, layered voice that didn't sound fully human anymore. He kept replaying the moment when Sergeant Willis screamed, "Broadcast anything," the moment he had mashed the transmit button, the moment the jungle had answered back. The next morning, Colonel Harrington gathered the platoon. Men, we've received updated intel. The Japanese regrouped 2 miles east, but they are hesitant to attack again. They're convinced we've brought in reinforcements. A cheer rose from the Americans, but Harrington raised a finger. They're not going to stay confused forever, and Division wants to test the radioman's transmission tonight, see if we can recreate the effect. The radioman's stomach twisted. "Sir," he said quietly, "what if it doesn't work again?" Harrington looked at him steadily. "Then we fight the old-fashioned way." Hours later, the signals officers returned with a new radio, brand new, gleaming, untouched by battle, and another device, a crude metal amplifier shaped like a funnel, wired to distort outgoing transmissions. "We attempted to replicate the cracked modulation plate," the lead officer explained. "We think this will approximate the same effect." The radio man frowned. "It doesn't look like it'll survive one artillery hit." "It's not supposed to," the officer replied. "It only needs to survive until nightfall." That didn't make him feel better. Night fell quickly, quicker than usual, or maybe it just felt that way because the radio man knew what was coming. He sat in the same crater as the night before, headset ready, amplifier wired, Sergeant Willis beside him. The jungle rustled. Not with Japanese soldiers, with uncertainty. They were out there, watching, trying to decide whether last night's illusion had been real. The radio man took a deep breath. "You ready?" Willis whispered. "No." "Good," Willis said. "If you were ready, I'd be worried." At 20:43 hours, Colonel Harrington gave the order. "Begin the test." 2-minute transmission. The radio man pressed the key. "Testing, testing. This is Baker Ridge Platoon." The sound that blasted from the amplifier didn't sound human. It was deeper, hollower, echoing unnaturally across the valley like 100 overlapping voices. The radio man felt his skin prickle. Sergeant Willis's eyes widened. "Jesus," he whispered. "It sounds like the whole damn Marine Corps." From the jungle, the Americans heard frantic Japanese shouting, branches cracking, boots retreating. Harrington's binoculars snapped up. "They're pulling back again." The test had worked, but the radio man didn't feel victorious. He felt like he had unleashed something he didn't fully understand, something the war had created, something the jungle had amplified, something born from desperation and fear. "Kid," Willis said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You might have just changed how we fight night battles." But the radio man wasn't sure if that was a good thing, because he knew one truth the others didn't. The ghostly voice that scared the Japanese out of their own strategy wasn't manufactured. Not really. It was an accident, a fluke, a byproduct of chaos and luck. And now, Command wanted to replicate that accident, to industrialize fear, to turn one man's mistake into a weapon. The radio man stared into the jungle, where shadows moved like memories. He wondered what the Japanese troops were whispering to each other right now. Maybe they were telling each other the same thing American troops had whispered for months. The jungle has spirits. The jungle speaks. The jungle chooses sides. And for one miraculous night, it had chosen theirs. The radio man didn't know if it would choose them again. But as the test echoed across the valley, and as the Japanese withdrew once more, one truth became clear. The war in the Pacific wasn't just a battle of men and machines. It was a battle of fear, deception, and the unpredictable power of the land itself. And one American radio man by mistake had just rewritten the rules. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot,